Hola everybody, we've got Roger here as usual. I have a Miss Scarlet down here below me. So some of you might have noticed there's a little thing going on over in Europe right now. It's actually something that I've been paying pretty close attention to over the last few days as things have been kind of ratcheting up over there. I am really interested in geopolitics and history. Obviously, those are some of the main things that I do on my channel. And I've learned quite a bit about the current situation right now over the last few days. But what I'm missing is a lot of the historical context for what is going on. Now, of course, I've heard, a lot of explanations as to why Russia wants to invade Ukraine. And the main reasons I've heard are because Russia wants Ukraine to be a buffer state between them and NATO, and they want to try and prevent Ukraine from becoming part of NATO because they really feel like NATO is expanding too far east, too close to them. They kind of feel threatened by that. I've also learned more about what NATO is. Now, I have grown up hearing about NATO my entire life, but I didn't really understand what it was for. I just knew it was some sort of like a military alliance between the United States and Europe. But I did not understand that it was specifically designed as a deterrent to the Soviet Union. And I didn't understand that it was just a defensive pact either. And so missing that key information, I didn't understand that NATO was basically the enemy of Russia and Russia did not view NATO favorably. I've just learned a lot over the last few days about all of this, but I still feel very ignorant about, the history of it and why everything's happening. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like we are witnessing a pretty big historical event. It just has that feel to it. And I don't know if it's just like a little bit of media sensationalism, but this just kind of feels like one of the biggest military / geopolitical things to happen since maybe World War II, or at least that's what everybody's saying. And maybe because it's happening in Europe, it just feels a little bit closer to home. But I know what you Europeans are saying, well, you're in the freaking United States, you're on the other side of the world from all of this. Well, we are the ones that are right next to all of this happening. And yeah, I understand that, like for you guys, it's way more closer to home. But, the US does have a pretty strong alliance with Europe. And, if stuff goes down in Europe, we're probably going to get involved if it involves, I guess, the NATO countries. That said, what it looks like right now is just a regional conflict between Ukraine and Russia. There are no real signs that it's going to expand beyond that, even though there are a lot of people out there screaming that World War III is about to happen. I don't think that it's going to be quite that, but I do feel for everybody who is directly involved with this over in that part of the world. I wish it wasn't happening, but I don't know. It just, like, I'm seeing some stuff happen that's similar to, the beginnings of the two previous world wars. I'm not saying that it's going to escalate into that, but it's just interesting to see some of the tactics being used that I've learned about in the last year or so on my channel in other conflicts. And it's just kind of like history is repeating itself right now. It's fascinating and at the same time horrifying to be watching this. But yeah, I am a firm believer in you can't fully understand the present without understanding the past. So that is why I want to go back and learn more about what happened in the past that kind of maybe precipitated all of this. So the first video I'm going to start with, kind of in this learning journey about this part of the world, is how and why did the Soviet Union collapse? Now, obviously, I am familiar with the Cold War, and I think the Soviet Union collapsed in like 1991 or something. I remember the Berlin Wall came down and Germany reunited. And after all of that, I guess there was a lot of the Eastern European countries kind of separated from the Soviet Union. But see, that's where I'm completely ignorant. I don't know how Belarus or Estonia or Latvia or Ukraine came to be. Like, I don't understand how or why they exist exactly. So we're gonna start there with all of this. I am going to look into the history of Ukraine and the history of Russia just to, again, just learn a little bit more maybe about stuff that's led up to all of this, and maybe just learn more about like their culture and their mindset. So here we go. Let's take a look at why the Soviet Union collapsed.
Christmas Day, 1991. Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev announced, "We are living in a new world." And with these 7 words, the Soviet Union was dissolved and Gorbachev stepped down from his post. After 40 years of the Cold War and the threat of a nuclear holocaust, the world's largest communist state broke up into 15 independent republics, meaning the USA was now handed the accolade of new world superpower. At its strongest, the Soviet Union had over 5 million soldiers stationed around the world, and they all stepped down without a shot being fired under the new regime. Today,
Really?
we will explore exactly what came to pass in this episode of the infographic show, How and Why Did the Soviet Union Collapse? In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union appeared to be somewhat of a powerhouse, exhibiting a rigid recovery from the invasion of Afghanistan and with an economy that appeared to be performing well. The Union appeared from the surface as powerful as it was back in the 1950s. But looks can be deceiving. Beneath the facade, the Soviet Union was splitting apart, and it had been happening for decades. Although there were many factors at play, some reasons were as follows. Mikhail Gorbachev rose to power in 1985 with plans to reform the nation with a hybrid communist-capitalist system similar to modern-day China. He also planned to ease restrictions on freedom of speech and religion. Before this, millions of Soviets were arrested for speaking out against the state. However, his plan backfired as he discovered that the loosening of control over the people and reforming political restrictions meant the people used their newfound powers to critique the government until they eventually succeeded in pushing for reform. This brand of communism had operated historically on tight central control. The loosening of control led to the abandonment of the entire construct. Back in the days of Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and Joseph Stalin, the Soviets were led with strong ideological beliefs tied to Marxism. By the 1960s, the radical policies of the past leaders were abandoned in favor of a more conservative approach. By the 1970s, the Soviet people noticed the rise of the political elite who lived in posh homes, ate in fancy restaurants, and spent their vacations at luxury ski resorts while millions of average Joes died from starvation. Younger generations were less keen to toe the line as their parents had and were willing to step forward and protest for change. These newer generations were more in tune with world events and slowly but surely began to pull at the strands of the political regime. Cold War tensions with the United States rose in the 70s and 80s, and with Ronald Reagan's leadership and the resulting increase in military spending, it seemed that the US had won the nuclear standoff. The Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, claimed to be able to blast Russian missiles as they fell, meaning, in theory, the US could win the long-running battle of wits. Reagan also managed to isolate the Soviets from the rest of the world economy, and without export sales in oil, the Soviet economy was severely weakened and limited.
So that is, I think, a similar tactic to what a lot of the NATO countries are threatening to do to Russia now, if I'm correct, is trying to economically isolate them, which I don't know if it'll work nowadays because I hear that they have some sort of like SWIFT banking system or something, and they would probably just partner with China. So the sanctions may not really affect them like they did maybe back then. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. This is just stuff that I, read about. Maybe some of you can know more about that than I do and can let me know down in the comments if that's correct or not. But it looks like NATO and the US are trying to kind of do what they did at the end of the Cold War here to try and take out this, or try to lessen the Russia's power now.
The Soviets were unable to turn a corner, and in the 1980s, breadlines were commonplace as poverty soared. Many people didn't have basic clothing or shoes, and under these conditions, it is only a matter of time before the people call out for regime change. And then there is the nation's...
Oh, okay. So the sanctions, I guess, that the US and maybe other countries did this too, are what led to the breadlines and stuff, basically. And it may have something to do as well with the communist, regime or whatever that they had, but I had always thought it was to do with communism more than anything else, which I'm sure it probably had an effect as well on that. But it sounds like, the sanctions also were a huge factor in that.
It's only a matter of time before the people call out for regime change. And then there is the nation's structure itself. When you have 15 radically different republics under one flag with different ethnicities, cultures, and languages, there are bound to be inherent tensions. 1989 nationalist movements brought about regime change in Poland and Czechoslovakia as the Soviet satellite nations began to split away. As these nations began to pull away, the central apparatus was weakened until it finally collapsed. Due to all these factors, by 1991, the Soviet Union was unable to maintain a normal functioning economy and run a huge military simultaneously. Gorbachev, unwilling to go to war like his predecessors Lenin and Stalin might have done, instead pulled the plug on the military and the 15 republics went their separate ways. Although a devoted Marxist, Gorbachev was an independent thinker who respected the need for reform and planned a restructuring of the economy. This, along with his vision to lessen the control held by central government and a move towards uncensored media, laid the path for total reform. The seeds were planted, and the Soviet Union was no more.
Okay, well that was a really short video. It didn't go into as much detail as I hoped it was going to. I would like to know more about kind of like the whole process of those other regions, as he said, pulling away from the Soviet Union and forming their own countries. It sounds to me like it's lucky that the Russians had Gorbachev as their leader at that time. He was the right guy to bring about those reforms and those changes. If maybe somebody else had been in charge that was a bit more of a staunch, communist, a little bit more of a control freak, maybe a lot of these other countries wouldn't have been able to pull away like that. I don't know. I'm sure it's way more complicated than what they put in this video. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. I am going to be exploring this topic more in depth, but this was a nice little overview of it right here. One weird thing I don't think I realized was that Poland, I guess, was part of the Soviet Union until the 90s. So is it a fairly recent thing that Poland has been an independent country then? I feel like I should know this because I have been studying World War II, but I haven't really studied World War, the after effects of World War II. I guess the Soviets did have territory as far west as Berlin, so I guess that would make sense that anything east of that would have been in the Soviet Union. But yeah, I think I just had in my head that Poland's just been around for a really long time. They existed before World War II, didn't they? And then they kind of got absorbed into the Soviet Union, and then they got their independence again after the Cold War, basically. Is that right? Anyway, you guys will let me know what you think about this. If you want to further explain some things down in the comments, I would appreciate it. And also hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. And if you look at the description of this video and my pinned comment, you'll find links to all of my social media and my Patreon there, where I do videos, including The World at War, which is a 1973 26 episode series on World War II. Got that over on Patreon if you're interested in checking that out, along with a lot of other stuff. I also have a Star Trek podcast for all you Trekkies out there if you're interested in checking that out. The link is also there with everything else. Anyway, stay tuned for more stuff coming up on this topic, as well as a lot of other things. We're not going to just do Russia, Ukraine stuff over the next few days. We'll do some other stuff as well. But just because all of this is really kicking off over in Europe, I really wanted to kind of get better educated on it. So hope you guys don't mind indulging me with that. And I'm sure I can learn a lot from all of you as well. I'll look forward to that, and yeah, we'll see you next time.